today I can definitely say that I'm glad that it was quote unquote failed attempt. I'm definitely glad to be here today. Back then I would not have been.
Hey there, my name is Sean, and this is Suicide Noted. On this podcast, I talk with suicide attempt survivors so that we can hear their stories. Every year around the world, millions of people try to take their own lives, and we almost never talk about it. And when we do talk about it, many of us, including me, well, we are not very good at it. So one of my goals with this podcast is to have more conversations and hopefully better conversations with attempt survivors. Now, we are talking about suicide, so this may not be a good fit for everyone. Please take that into account before you listen. I do hope you listen because there is so much to learn. If you are a suicide attempt survivor and you'd like to share your story, I would love to talk. Please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com, or you can message us on our Twitter or Facebook pages at Suicide Noted. And to all of our listeners, our growing loyal fans, thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. I hope you keep listening, and please share this podcast with other people who may want or need to hear it. If you'd like to help us out with an ongoing financial contribution, we have a Patreon page. I will put that in the show notes. We have a few different tiers. So if you'd like to become a supporter in that way, wonderful. Either way, thanks so much for all of your support. Today, I am talking with Kristen. Kristen lives in Indiana, and she is a suicide attempt survivor. Hey, Kristen, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
How am I? Really? No, I'm all right. I'm all right. I have not had a conversation, I don't believe, with anybody in the great state of Indiana with respect to this podcast.
It's really not that great of a state, honestly.
I don't know much about Indiana.
There's not a whole lot
There's
here.
basketball. There's some farms.
Yeah.
Indianapolis. It doesn't matter. Anyway.
We got some cows and we got some crime. Yeah. That's about it.
Cows and crime. I love it. I don't know if I love it, but yeah. I want to ask you, even though it's recorded, so I can always take stuff out, are there certain things that you would prefer I just don't ask or we don't talk about? Because I know sometimes this is some sensitive stuff.
I mean, maybe if it had been like a lot more recently that things had happened, but I've, been working with therapists and stuff and working through all of it. So I'm pretty comfortable talking about it. Okay.
So, one, thank you again for joining me.
Of course.
Appreciate it. I want to ask you, sort of start it off, is by understanding more how you came to be comfortable talking about it, particularly with me, why you reached out. I'm glad you did. Did I reach out to you or you reached out to me?
I reached out to you after hearing your podcast on Spotify. Yeah.
So I love hearing that, just that people are hearing it. That's nice because,
yeah.
What compelled you to reach out? Because I know a lot of people would not do that. So that's where I want to start.
I think the reason that I reached out is because a lot of people don't reach out. I think there's so much stigma behind it that a lot of people are embarrassed to talk about it, or, they've got a lot of shame, or they just would rather just kind of keep it bottled up than, share it, even though sharing it really could, make other people realize that, they're not alone and they're not the only ones dealing with it and things like that.
Why do you think, we'll speculate here, we're going to explore this question. Why do you think people are embarrassed or feel shame around talking about it?
I think part of it's just because in general in America, I mean, and in other countries, I'm sure, but there's always been this, shame behind depression. People don't want to admit, that they've got problems, or a lot of people might think that, you've attempted suicide, so you were weak, or, you were selfish, or, kind of along those lines of things. People don't usually have positive reactions when you know, tell them that, you know, you've survived an attempt.
Right.
Or even that you're just depressed.
Right. The world would be a different place if people responded differently to that, I think.
Absolutely.
But that's why we're doing this, I guess. So that's one of the reasons why we
Right.
talk about it, and you and I at least are talking about it.
Right.
Share with me however you want to, or in as much as you're comfortable, about your attempt. Was there one or more than one?
There was two, but there was one that was much more serious, I guess, than the other one. Just back in the end of summer, beginning of fall of 2018 was just a really dark time because I mean they all happened, you know, pretty close together, and it originally started where I mean I was really depressed. I ended up calling the cops on myself and telling them that, you know, I owned a gun and asked them if they could come and get it because I didn't feel safe with it in my home, and they did. And that was actually even before both of my attempts. My first attempt was, I believe, August of 2018. I don't really have any recollection of it. This is just what a family member has told me, but I had overdosed on pills and alcohol. I guess I was just found before, you know, it got to be to a lethal point. My more serious attempt, I actually had been planning it for a while because I was roommates with my younger sister at the time and I didn't want, you know, her to be the one that found me. So I made sure that she was at work first, and then I actually overdosed on pills and alcohol, but I had actually also tied a rope around my neck so that when I lost consciousness from the pills and the alcohol, that would, I guess, cut off my air supply. But I had actually planned and called the hotline on myself right before I passed out because my thought process was if I called, then, you know, the cops or somebody would find me before my sister got home from work, and so she wouldn't have to be the one that found me. So right before I felt like I was going to pass out, I did reach out and I told them where I was and stuff like that. But because I lived in an apartment complex, they were not actually allowed to enter my apartment because they didn't know exactly which one I was in.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother was actually a neighbor. He lived in the same complex. And when he saw the cops at my apartment, he had gone over there and asked them, you know, if they were looking for me. And they said yes. So he was actually able to get them into the apartment. When they got into the apartment, I did not have a heartbeat, and I guess my lips were blue. So, I mean, had it been even, you know, minutes off of when they did find me, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the
You'd be
outcome
dead.
could have been completely different.
Right, right. You may not be here right now.
Right. Even then it was, I guess, I don't know if miracle is the word I want to use, but my brother at that point in his life was a very big drinker, you know,
Mm-hmm.
every weekend. And he said for whatever reason that night he just didn't feel like it because he was not supposed to be home at that time. He was supposed to be out drinking with his friends. So he actually got home early because he didn't end up drinking. So had he not decided not to drink that night, he would not have shown up at the right time.
How did he
There was
respond?
He doesn't really like to talk about it even to this day, but I know from what my sister told me that I guess the cops were kind of, I guess he said, spazzing out, and they were kind of running around the apartment and stuff. And he was the one that actually had to take the rope off of my neck and was like yelling at them to come and help him and stuff. But I guess they weren't a whole lot of help. And so he ended up having to be the one to do that. So I know that's really affected him. I mean, even to this day.
And that was the second attempt, the one you were just referencing. When was that?
That was September 7th of 2018.
So it sounds like, and if I'm off here, you'll tell me, please. Your first attempt, you tried,
Mm-hmm.
and people pick on me for the word choice. So I want to be careful. You know, when I say succeeded or whatever, I don't.
Right.
You're alive after that attempt.
Right.
Let's leave it at that. You attempted shortly after that.
Mm-hmm.
I often ask people how they feel about their attempt, and when somebody tries and then shortly after tries again, it sounds like you were on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
You were like, nah, didn't work. So maybe I'm off here, but tell me, how do you feel when you're the first attempt when you didn't die, and Now that it's been more than 2 years after your second attempt, like, how do you feel about the fact that you're still here with us?
Well, after the first attempt, I was sent, to a hospital, obviously. And that hospital that I went to, it was kind of almost like a prison. They kind of just locked you in your room. There was no therapy. The doctors didn't come and, try to come up with some sort of plan to prevent it from happening again. And so at that point, I was in a dark spot and I didn't feel like they had helped at all. And so I felt, I was angry, I guess, with myself that it did not, succeed, or whatever term you want to use. And I had sat there and thought about all the places I had made mistakes in my first attempt. And that's when I made my second attempt because, I was like, oh, well, this didn't work. So maybe I need to change and, do this so that maybe I don't pull through this one. But then after the second one, I was sent to a completely different hospital. The doctors there were incredible. They
Mm.
actually listened. They actually wanted to help. We tried, medications. I've been in counseling. I've also done something called ECT to
Yep.
help with it.
Yep.
And that has been really significant in helping to this point. And today I can definitely say that I'm glad that it was, quote unquote, failed attempt.
Yeah.
I'm definitely glad to be here today. Back then, I would not have been.
So the ECT helped.
Yes, tremendously.
Therapy helps.
Yes, yes, very
Are
much.
you on any sort of medication for that?
So right now, I'm actually kind of in between medications. We're trying to find one that works because since my attempts, I've been diagnosed with a couple of different mental health disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're kind of trying to find the right combination for them right now.
Can be tricky, for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Here's a really tough question I want to ask. And it is there a why? Specifically around why Kristen attempted suicide?
So after talking with the doctors and stuff, one of my first diagnosis after my attempts was PTSD.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of it was the fact that I was not working through those problems. I was not taking any sort of medication for those problems. It got to be too much. I felt like, because I have a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, in the mental state that I was in, that she would have been, better off without, having a mother around that was constantly dealing with that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, but definitely the PTSD.
One of the myths that I think is important to talk about, and it just came up with somebody I spoke to earlier this week, was this myth about being selfish. I mean, what you just said about your daughter is very similar in some ways to what she said, because she said, when I chose to attempt suicide, I genuinely thought I was doing both my daughter and the rest of her family a favor.
Mm-hmm.
It was out of love.
Yep.
Now, regardless of what others might say about that then or now,
Right.
that's how she felt.
Right. 100%. I can totally back up what she's saying because when I've been in a healthy state of mind, I understand why it's so hard for people to see it from our perspective, because even when I'm in a healthy state of mind, even though I have been through all of that, I think, wow, that was incredibly stupid of me to think. But when the depression was as bad as it was, I genuinely thought that my entire family and the world would have just been better off if I was not there.
Yeah. When someone's feeling that way, what do you say or do to sort of help them feel otherwise? It seems like a tall task, and I don't know if there's an answer. Just like, what could someone have said to you then? I don't know if this is something that's going to make sense. What could someone have done or said then that may have prevented you from attempting, if anything?
I tell a lot of people, that friends that have said, I'm sorry that I, wasn't there to say the right thing. And honestly, with as deep down as I was in the depression, I don't know if there was anything anybody could have said
Right.
that would have made me change my mind, because I was completely 100% convinced that, they're just saying that to be nice. And
Mhm.
if I really saw what they really thought, they really would be better off if I wasn't here.
Yeah. You had said you've dealt with PTSD.
Hmm.
I don't want to harbor on people's pain, right? And get into the details of their lives. But I ask because I know people who are listening. One of my goals is to help them feel less alone. That
Right.
might be you're not the only person who's ideated or attempted, and that might help you in knowing you're not alone. And sort of connected to that is I'm curious to learn a little bit more, again, and as much as you're comfortable sharing, of the stuff that you dealt with growing up that led to those two attempts in 2018. I'm not a therapist. I'm not asking you for all that stuff, but just to get a
Right.
sense of what was your life like, and in part that, led to PTSD among other diagnoses or stuff that you've dealt with. Does that make sense?
Yes. One of the biggest, I guess, is a relationship that I was in. I know that that's one of, the main, if not the biggest factor in, my PTSD. It was an extremely abusive relationship. I stayed in it way longer than I should have for some personal reasons. I mean, it was just you see on the TV about, abuse cases and stuff like that. And it was so similar to the ones I've seen on TV, but I didn't realize that when I was in it. But I mean, even the, pressing charges and then, going back and recanting my statement and saying that it was a lie, even though it really did happen, just out of fear of retaliation from him. The relationship that caused the PTSD ended probably no later than 2013 or 14. But just the fact that I didn't take care of all of the damage that was done because of that relationship, it all just kind of manifested and then just kept getting worse and worse and worse over the years.
Building
Yes.
year after year after year.
Yes.
Was there something about that particular day in the fall of 2018? Because I always wonder, like, things build,
Mhm.
obviously build and build and build, and at some point we break.
Mhm.
May not be a particular thing. It might not have been that someone said something, or you got the bill in the mail, or that you had one too many drinks. Do you remember? Was there something about that day where it was like, I'm done, and that you actually took action on it as opposed to all the other days leading up to it?
Because it was premeditated for quite a while.
Huh?
I don't think there I think I picked that day specifically because, I knew my sister was going to be at work, I figured, my brother wasn't going to be at home, and I felt like that would have been the best for them, but I don't really know specifically what maybe my breaking point was to where I was like, I'm gonna do this and, start planning for it. Because the planning, it was pretty time consuming and it did take a decent amount of time.
Yeah. Interesting point, because yes, sometimes people plan. It's not just an
Mhm.
impulsive thing where they, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's why I, at the time I was so sure that that was, what I needed to do because it wasn't impulsive. It was something that had been on my mind for a long time. And, the feeling wasn't getting better.
Did you say goodbye to anyone? Do you remember either time?
No, I know I wrote notes
You
one of the
did?
time, but I did not say goodbye because I didn't want anybody to try to stop me.
Yeah.
My most serious attempt, the one that I was at the time, I was 100% convinced that it was going to work, was on September 7th. And on September 1st, I went and met up with one of my really good friends that I hadn't seen in a couple of years, hung out with him and had a good day and stuff like that. I had talked to him, after the fact, about a year after my attempt. And he said he kind of had a gut feeling that that's what it was because I hadn't reached out in a while and just randomly reached out.
Wow.
So,
He's
yeah.
pretty attentive or something.
Yeah, he is.
Mm. Yeah. And so you had said the second time you were sure it was going to work, your brother found you, and that in and of itself is sort of a miracle.
Mhm.
You got the kind of good help you needed to sort of
Yes.
get right. But were you still at all pissed when you woke up, or something where it's like, fuck?
So when I passed out, I don't have any recollection of it up until I woke up in the ICU. I believe it was my mom and my sister, or my mom and my biological father in there. And the first thing I remember is waking up and just seeing the hurt on my mom's face.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was at that point I realized, all right, I can't do this to her. I knew she loved me and stuff like that, but at the time I was so convinced that she would have been better off. But seeing just the hurt that I caused her, I knew I knew it was time. I said it to myself, okay, I need to get help, if not for myself, for her and for my daughter.
And how old were you then?
Believe I was 22.
Oh, you're so young.
Yeah, I'll be 25 next month.
How old's your daughter?
She is 9. I actually had her at 15 years old.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right response. Cool, but I'm older and without kids, I'm always like, wow, what a different life.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So your mom responded the way she did, or you saw her look. If you listen to the podcast, there's probably some questions you'll hear me ask, and I always ask them. So whether it's your mom, your brother, maybe your daughter was a little young. Did your daughter know about it, by the way?
No, she does not. I plan on telling her when she's a little bit more able to understand.
She listens to
Just
podcasts.
no.
Because let's make
She ha-
sure. Let's make sure she
yeah.
doesn't accidentally find this. Okay.
Right. No, I'm pretty strict about that kind of stuff just because of the way the world is today. I'm trying to protect her as long as I can.
Right. How did the people in your life, family, friends, whomever, respond to your attempt? Yeah.
An overwhelming outpour of love and
Mm.
support and, care, especially in the beginning, when I was in the hospital, because after my serious attempt, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. My mom visited every day. My sister, who was my roommate, visited almost every single day. I had a couple of coworkers come in. I had, friends from high school that I hadn't talked to in years reach out to me.
So mostly positive.
Yes. Afterwards, even a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting down with my sister and, we hung out. We kind of, sat down and talked about it. I caused, an immense amount of pain, but I think they were strong enough to put that aside for the time being because they just wanted to see me get better and they were just happy that I was still here. So they
Mhm.
were willing to put that to the side just to help me get through, whatever I was dealing with. Because
They probably were. It was probably on their. Oh, they wanted to say some stuff.
yeah,
Oh, do we want to tell her?
right. Well, and I taught when I was talking to my sister, she was, especially for her, my older brother and my mom, she was just, kind of talking about the effects that it had. Like she said, ever since then, she's scared. She starts to freak out when, she tries to call somebody and they don't answer, if, she's expecting them to be, by their phone, or if she misses a call from, one of her family members, she kind of panics and always jumps to think the worst because of that phone call that she got about my attempt.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
it definitely has lingering effects, even not just on the person that attempts, but, their loved ones as well.
How often do you talk about it? I realize there's not a lot of real sort of spaces or reasons. You're not going to just like meet someone in a cafe and just start talking about it. So,
Right.
how often does it come up where you talk about it?
It's probably only come up a handful of times. I mean, outside of therapy, I've had a friend who was possibly suicidal, and I kind of use that, especially the hurt that even the attempt caused my family. I use that to kind of tell her, it doesn't seem like it, but they're gonna be really hurt, and been able to use it a couple of times in that situation. And then my family doesn't really talk about it a whole lot, which I'm okay with because, if I need to vent something,
Hmm.
I do that in therapy, as well as like my mom has gone with me to the counseling sessions a couple of times just so that, we kind of had a safe space to really talk about it.
Definitely. Yeah. Great.
Um,
I'm glad that that's available.
yeah, absolutely.
Are there any specific sort of misunderstandings or myths, be it around your experience with all this, or speaking more broadly about suicide?
The biggest myth that I guess doesn't really make me angry, but I hate when people say suicide is selfish.
Yeah, it's a big one that comes up, Kristen.
Yes.
Man, yeah. Why does that
Yeah.
bother you?
Because it's not, because and I understand why it could be a myth, because you really don't know what a suicidal person is feeling unless you've been there. Even if you've been close to it, you don't fully understand it unless you've experienced it. And I can see why they would think, how could you do this to the family? How could you do this to me? How could you leave, so and so behind? But I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart, when I was suicidal, I really truly was convinced that that was what was best for my entire family.
That must be such a tough spot. You think
Yeah.
you're doing something for good, for love.
Mhm.
Not only yeah, and it's just the opposite that people are sort of coming at you.
Right.
Mm,
And another myth, at least in my case, is when people say that suicidal people want to die, they just want to die. I sat there numerous times, even, when I was planning coming up to my attempt, even just sitting there thinking about how I was going to be gone. Like, I would start, I would break down, I would bawl my eyes out because I didn't want to die. I needed everything to stop.
right. You tried stuff to make
Yes.
it stop. A lot of stuff. It didn't work well enough.
Right. Yep.
People aren't very good, Kristen, I don't think, with, I don't know if the word's nuance or sort of gray area, conflict, in that, like, what you're saying makes sense. Look, there might be people out there who legitimately want to die. We don't know for sure.
Right.
I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Is I don't really want to die. I'm just, nothing's working. I've been
Right.
trying it for a while. This is the only thing that will work.
Right.
No? Is that an accurate way of you feeling, or did I put words in your mouth?
Oh, no, absolutely. And even people, say that, they don't want to die. They just want the pain to stop. But it had gotten so bad that it wasn't even, I just wanted the pain to stop. I needed everything to stop. I didn't know how else to do it at that point.
And we
So,
don't tend to give people a lot of credit for the fight they fight to figure that out.
yep.
The narrative tend, well, maybe it's just what I hear, I don't know, of the negative stuff around the attempt as opposed to all the positive stuff around the struggle and the fight.
Hmm.
And if you put, hey, you know what's so weird? If you put that same energy into getting an A on a test or climbing a mountain, we would worship the ground you walk on.
Right.
But all the same energy, just not to feel like absolute shit, we kind of dismiss. And I'm like,
Yep.
that's really hard, y'all.
Yep. People don't understand that mental health is health. Taking care of your mental health is, you cut your knee open or something like that, you're going to go to the doctor and you're going to get it fixed. And nobody's going to, bat an eyelash. But if, you start getting depression and stuff, there's so much stigma behind it. And a
Yeah.
lot of people really don't understand it.
Well, I'd asked you the question earlier. Not. Yeah, some of my questions I don't really expect like a right answer or even any answer. But when I asked about embarrassment or shame, it really does make me wonder. The stigma, I guess, is the
Hmm.
word. I don't. I just don't know why it's the way it is or where it came from. And it might. I don't know if we'll ever know. It just confounds me. Maybe that's one of the reasons I was tempted to put a damn podcast together about it. I don't
Right.
understand the stigma around it. And I want to, even though I have a bit of an attitude about it. I really don't get it.
Right. I understand. If I feel like the suicide rate in and of itself would go down significantly if people knew they could reach out. I'm not ashamed of it anymore, but even to this day, I, have friends that are like, well, why couldn't you just snap out of it? Your mindset is completely your control. If you think
Right.
negative, you're going to get negative results. And it's like, that's not how it works with depression.
Right.
And a lot of people don't understand that.
But it's really tricky when they don't know what they don't know
Right.
for them to modify their words or behavior. It's really, really tricky, but right. I've
So,
heard those things that you just said to me. I feel like I was
yeah.
almost triggered. This idea of like, well, just snap. Kristen, tell me if we're on the same page here. If I could just snap out of it, I'd snap out of it, you dipshit.
Exactly. I wish it was, and even to this day, I wish it was that simple, because it's a lifelong battle. And, if I could just snap it off and suddenly everything's fine in my head, that would make my life so easier.
Course. It's such a way to really invalidate. It doesn't happen to me often, but when anything like that has happened to me, snap out of it or think positively. I just want to say, like,
Hmm.
I hadn't thought of that. Thank you so much for bringing that wisdom into my life because
Right.
I just hadn't thought of the possibility.
Right.
Nobody appreciates my New York sarcasm, Kristen. So, but
No,
you,
no, that's funny. That's a comeback I'm gonna have to use one of these
oh
days.
yeah, no, take a few moments and genuinely, yes. So, to our listeners, open ended question, any words for them whoever they are in 83 countries now and the state of Indiana.
That's awesome. I know what I want to say. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to put it into
Sure.
words. There's people out there that understand, you're not alone. It's not selfish. There's people that really, truly, understand where you're coming from. They felt that pain. Find somebody to talk to, even if it's just one person. There's resources, there's hotlines, just somebody, because even just talking about it, saying it verbally almost, I guess, takes a weight off your shoulders. It really does feel good to not bottle it up inside and feel like not a single soul in the world would understand.
You
So
found the words.
yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that really truly could help. Even just one person, not
Great.
bottling it up is so important.
Yeah,
It's like
100%.
it's like taking a soda bottle and, shaking it up when you take that cap off,
Yeah.
but then all the pressure's gone.
Any chance that you'll try again, do you think?
No, because one, I'm in a much better place now, but more importantly than anything else is I've got the support that I need. I know now I'm aware of all of the resources that I've got, around me. And also really important, I've seen the way that even my attempt affected my family. I can't imagine what an actual suicide would do to them.
And you've made it through what, 9, 10 months of a damn lockdown.
Yeah.
And you reached out to talk to me on the podcast. So that's something for sure that's pretty positive.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think.
I agree. It's been pretty good. The quarantine's not been as bad as I was worried it would be.
Yeah.
Luckily I work at, quote unquote essential job. So I've not been, stuck at home or anything like that. But, for people maybe that are depressed, that are, stuck at home or they're laid off or whatever, even going for a walk, just getting out of the walls of your home can
Yeah.
make a big difference.
When you when you say quote unquote essential jobs, it sounds like you don't think it's essential, but somebody else does.
I for a shipping company.
Wow.
It
And wait, let's back up for a second. Well, I guess in the world it's 2020, so you can be anywhere doing anything. But I think if I had to guess 50 jobs somebody in Indiana does, shipping is not the first 50 that would come to mind.
Yeah, no, I do. I actually drive a yard truck for them, so I move trailers around all night.
Quick thing I've never done before. I do a little favorite game. It's kind of not related to the reason we are on the podcast. Ready?
Okay.
Your favorite musical band or group?
It would have to be maybe Nirvana or Breaking Benjamin,
Okay.
actually.
Your favorite color?
Blue.
Food?
Probably Italian, but it kind of
Yep.
depends on my mood.
Couple more I got. TV or film or both.
That's a difficult one. I like
Or
Law and Order.
Law and Order.
That's probably my favorite.
Is that the one where it goes dun?
Yes.
Yeah, that famous.
So,
The only other thing, a couple other questions. You were in a car
yes.
talking to me. What
Yes.
kind of car is it?
It's a GMC Terrain. Would not recommend.
Oh, really? You don't like it?
No, I do not. It's got a lot of issues in the past. I would say it's still considered reliable. So I'm not complaining, but I'm not recommending this type of car to anybody.
I never assume I ask the right questions or the best questions. So did I leave something out that you wanted to share?
More than anything, I just wanted to share my story so that, people listening understood that, they're not alone. And, there really are people that deal with, really similar issues to what they're dealing with.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you. We connected and we found a time to talk. And I agree with you. I think people need to hear this stuff. And
Yes.
I do think they feel less alone.
Good. And
So
I know I did when I found your podcast. I think what you're doing is a really great thing.
thank you.
This isn't really a topic that a lot of people are willing to do, just because of the stigma behind it, I think. So the few people that are willing to, it definitely makes a difference, coming from somebody that has, attempted, it definitely makes a difference to know that, other people are at least trying, to understand what, suicide attempt survivors go through.
For sure. And I'm glad you're here to be able to share the story,
Well, I
because it could
appreciate
have
your
gone
time.
very differently based on what you've shared. And it
Yes.
does go very differently for some people.
Yes.
Not here
Unfortunately.
anymore. Yeah. Especially because it sounds like you're glad. I don't know if that's the best word, that you're here. Damn good for you and your family and your lovely daughter.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't want to be weird or presumptuous, but I'm betting she's happy that you're around.
Most days, yes. No.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Of
no,
course.
she definitely, she's a mama's girl for sure.
Mm,
So,
cool. Well, thanks again. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay strong, and we'll connect again soon, I hope.
alrighty. Thank you so much.
All right, Kristen. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening, and special thanks to Kristen out in Indiana. If you are a suicide attempt survivor and you'd like to share your story, I'd love to talk. You can email us hello@suicidenoted.com or reach out on social media @suicidenoted. Really appreciate you listening. And again, if you want to help out in some other ways, we've got that Patreon page. Check it out. Stay strong. Do the very best you can. I'll talk to you soon.